Hey, I want you to take a second and breathe. I know your day's probably been a whirlwind. Work, life, the usual grind. But for just a moment, let it all go. Let's step away from the rush. Just relax, find a comfortable spot, and let's take a break together. Where are you listening from? What's the time where you are? I'm curious. Whether it's late at night, early morning, or somewhere in between, we're all connected through these old stories. These myths have been passed down for centuries, but they still have a way of making us feel like we're all in this together, don't they? Take a deep breath in. Let it out. How's your body feeling right now? Tensed up? Or are you starting to let go of the weight of the day? We're here, together, taking this moment to unwind and dive into something timeless. Hey there. Tonight we're stepping away from dusty timelines and battle card epics and climbing somewhere a bit higher. Not to the realm of mortals, but to Mount Olympus itself. Just imagine. It's the beginning. Nothing is here yet, just chaos, darkness. And from that void, something miraculous happens. We're going back to the beginning, the first chapter of the cosmos where everything that was, is, and ever will be, came into being. I know. Sounds heavy, but relax. Let's take this slowly, one step at a time. Out of chaos emerged Gaia, the earth, the first being who gave birth to the heavens above. Isn't that a thought? How could the earth itself be the mother of the sky? It's mind-boggling, right? But let that sink in for a moment. You and I were made from dust and earth, and yet we have this magnificent cosmic link to something so vast. Breathe that in, my friend. Gaia gave birth to Uranus, the sky, and together they created the first gods, each one more powerful than the last. They weren't all perfect, though. Oh no. They had their flaws: greed, jealousy, love, just like you and me. Uranus, for example, wasn't the best partner. He locked his children away inside Gaia, and she, feeling the weight of this, cried out. She wasn't going to take it anymore. She called upon her youngest son, Cronus, and together they plotted to overthrow Uranus. You see, even gods can't escape their own emotional turmoil. Cronus, armed with a sickle, cut off Uranus's genitals, casting them into the sea. And from that, the goddess Aphrodite arose, born from the sea foam, radiant and beautiful. Think about that for a second. Even in moments of violence and chaos, beauty emerges. It's a paradox, isn't it? Cronus then became the ruler of the universe, but the story didn't end there. Oh no. You see, he was warned that one of his own children would overthrow him, just as he had done to his father. So, he did what any paranoid god would do. He swallowed his children whole. But one son, Zeus, was saved by his mother, Rhea, who tricked Cronus into swallowing a stone instead of the newborn god. Can you feel the tension? The world was about to change. You can almost hear the heartbeat of the earth speeding up as the gods' stories begin to take form, one moment at a time. Breathe deeply. Can you feel the weight of this, of how it all started with chaos and conflict? Think about how your own life has moments of chaos, but like these gods, from all of that, something new and beautiful can rise. It's all connected. Just take another breath in, slow it down, and let it out. The creation of the world, the birth of the gods. It wasn't a smooth ride. There's tension, there's conflict, there's a constant push and pull between love and power. And it's only going to get more complicated as we move through these stories, my friend. But for now, let's rest in the thought that the first gods, imperfect and flawed, were just like us. And as we move forward, we'll continue this journey, walking through the stories of the gods, their desires, their failures, their moments of brilliance, and the chaos that made them what they were. So, how are you feeling? Calm? Or do you have questions in your mind? These gods didn't have it all figured out either. In fact, they were often figuring things out on the fly. So maybe we can all learn something from that, don't you think? Take a deep breath. Let's move on. Take a moment to settle back in. I know we've been talking about the gods and their grand beginnings, but let's not rush. Let's take this slow. We've only just touched the surface of this ancient world. These stories, they've been passed down for centuries, but the way they feel, the way they resonate with us, it's like they were written yesterday, don't you think? Now, as I mentioned, the birth of the gods was no simple affair. Chaos had reigned before the first whispers of form and structure came into being. The Greeks had a way of seeing the universe that was both terrifying and beautiful at the same time. In their world, everything had its place. Everything had its purpose, even the chaos itself. Can you feel the weight of that? That even in the chaos there is order to be found? It's a curious thought, isn't it? We've spoken of Gaia, the earth, who brought forth the mighty Uranus, the sky. Together they bore the first gods, the Titans, powerful beings, each stronger than the last. And yet, even the Titans couldn't escape the same flaws that burden humanity: love, jealousy, greed. These weren't just gods living in a peaceful utopia. No, these gods fought, schemed, and bled, just as we do. Their stories are full of betrayal, pride, and passion. But somehow, it's in these very struggles that we find our connection to them. One of the first acts of violence in this mythological world was the castration of Uranus. I know, it sounds brutal, cutting off the very thing that created life. But think about it. Even in such a moment of violence, there was something that came from it. From Uranus's severed parts thrown into the sea, Aphrodite was born, the goddess of love and beauty. Isn't it fascinating how, even in destruction, life continues? In the chaos of the gods, a new and radiant force emerged. And it's this paradox that makes these stories so mesmerizing. The world was in turmoil, but love was being born. Now, let's turn our attention to Cronus. He was the son of Gaia and Uranus, and after overthrowing his father, he became the ruler of the universe. But he wasn't a perfect ruler, far from it. Cronus, just like his father, feared that his own children would rise up and dethrone him. So, what did he do? He swallowed them whole. One by one, his children were consumed by his fear. It's a sad and strange thing, really, to think that even gods can be ruled by fear. But there it is. The gods are not immortal because they are infallible, but because they are often wrapped up in their own emotions, their own fears. And then, just when you think that things couldn't get any darker, there's a twist. You see, Rhea, Cronus's wife, wasn't going to let this go on forever. She couldn't stand to see her children swallowed by her husband. So, when the time came for her sixth child to be born, she tricked Cronus. Instead of handing over the newborn Zeus, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and gave it to him instead. Cronus, unaware of the trick, swallowed the stone, and Zeus was saved. It's in this moment that the tides begin to turn. Can you feel it? The shift, the anticipation building, the moment when the gods' fates begin to change, when the power begins to slip from Cronus's grasp. Zeus, hidden away in a cave, was raised by nymphs, and as he grew older, he would come to fulfill the prophecy that had hung over his father's head. Cronus had feared his child, and rightly so, for it was Zeus who would eventually overthrow him. But before we rush into that battle, let's pause and take a breath. Can you feel the anticipation rising? The tension building as this story continues? These gods, these beings of immense power, they're not just distant figures in a book. No, they are emotional, they are vulnerable, they are real. Like us. They, too, wrestle with their fears, their desires, their anger. It's easy to forget that, isn't it? To think of them as perfect beings. But in truth, they're often more human than we give them credit for. And that's what makes these stories so powerful. When we look at these ancient myths, we see something timeless. Something that reflects the struggles we face day in and day out. The gods may live on Olympus, but they experience emotions and conflicts that we can relate to. Fear of losing power, jealousy over a lover, the drive to be seen as important. In every myth, no matter how grand the setting, we find these emotions, these human qualities, at the heart of the gods. So, let's move on, shall we? Let's follow Zeus, this child of destiny, as he grows in power, as he learns of his fate and the prophecy that looms over him. It's not a quick journey. No, we have to take this slowly, just like Zeus. He didn't rush his rise to power. He took his time, and so will we. Zeus's journey is one of transformation. It's one of patience, one of growth. And as we move forward in this story, let's remember that just like the gods, we too are on a journey. It might not be one of mythic proportions, but it's ours. And in the stillness of this moment, as we unwind and drift further into this story, perhaps we can take some comfort in knowing that even the gods had to learn, had to grow, had to face their fears. So, my friend, take another deep breath. Let's move ahead together. You, me, and the gods, connected by these timeless stories, connected by the very essence of what makes us human. Take a moment to breathe again. We're diving deeper into the heart of Greek mythology, but let's not rush it. We've left the cosmic origins behind, and now we're stepping into a tale with a very human heart. A story that carries more weight than you might first realize. We're about to explore Prometheus, the titan who gave fire to humanity. But before we do, let's just settle in again. Relax, and let's allow the story to unfold at its own pace. Where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? I'm curious, because no matter where you are, this myth, this story of sacrifice and consequence, stretches across time and space. Thousands of years ago, the Greeks told this tale. And yet, here we are, still listening, still connecting with the same human emotions that Prometheus felt. Take a deep breath in, and slowly let it out. How does your body feel right now? Have you let go of the day's weight? You know, sometimes we think of these ancient gods as untouchable. But when we sit with these stories, really sit with them, we start to see that they are no different from us. Prometheus's story, for example, is not just about a god who defied the will of Zeus. It's about a deep, powerful longing to do good, even when it's met with suffering. So, let's go back. Back to the time when the world was young, and the gods walked freely among mortals. Zeus, now ruling the heavens after overthrowing his father Cronus, looked upon the earth and saw something missing. Humanity was still in its infancy, fumbling in the darkness, struggling to survive. They had no fire, no means to cook their food, to warm themselves, to light their way through the cold, endless night. Can you imagine that? A world without fire? no warmth to cradle you during the dark, cold nights. It's hard to even picture, isn't it? But this is the world that Prometheus saw. He, the titan of foresight and creator of humanity, couldn't just stand by and let his creations live like this. There was something in him, something deeply compassionate, that made him want to change this, to give humanity what they lacked. But fire wasn't just a gift. It was power. And in the world of gods, power is a dangerous thing. Zeus, in all his authority, knew that fire would make humanity too strong, too independent. It would give them the means to rise up, to challenge the gods. So, naturally, he forbade anyone from giving it to them. But Prometheus couldn't help it. He couldn't stand by and watch the mortals suffer. So, he defied Zeus. He stole fire from the gods, sneaking into the sacred halls of Olympus, taking the divine flame that was reserved only for the gods and bringing it down to the earth. Can you feel the tension in that moment? Prometheus knew what he was doing. He was defying Zeus, and in doing so, he was risking everything. But in his mind, it was worth it. For Prometheus, the suffering of humanity was more important than his own safety. He gave the fire to mankind, and in doing so, gave them a chance to build, to create, to grow. They could now cook their food, forge weapons, light the night. For the first time, humanity had the power to change their own fate. It was a profound gift. Now, think about this. What does fire represent? It's not just a physical thing, it's transformation. It's creation. It's the spark that can start anything. In giving fire to humanity, Prometheus gave them the power to change, to evolve. Isn't that incredible? That one act, one moment of defiance, changed the course of history forever. But, as we know, the gods didn't take kindly to defiance. Zeus, furious that his rule had been challenged, was not going to let Prometheus's actions go unpunished. Oh no, he had plans of his own for the Titan. Prometheus was captured, bound to a rock, and there, day after day, an eagle would come and feast on his liver, only for it to regenerate each night, an eternal punishment. It was cruel. It was relentless. But it was the price Prometheus had to pay for his compassion. Isn't it strange how sometimes doing the right thing, helping others, comes with a cost? How much would you be willing to give up to do what you knew was right? Could you bear the weight of that kind of sacrifice? In that moment, Prometheus became a symbol of defiance, but also of the power of sacrifice for the greater good. He didn't give fire to humanity to win favor or gain glory. No, he did it because he couldn't stand to see them suffer. And in that act, he taught us something incredibly important. He taught us that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come at the greatest personal cost. As we sit with this story, what do you think of Prometheus? How does his sacrifice feel to you? Does it make you think about the sacrifices in your own life? Maybe it's not fire you're giving, but maybe it's your time, your energy, or your heart. We all have moments when we must decide whether to give something of ourselves for the good of others. Now, take a deep breath, in and out. Prometheus's story is far from over. His punishment might have been eternal, but it wasn't the end of the road for him. You see, Prometheus wasn't just punished by Zeus. He was also bound by fate. Yet, even in his suffering, there was something enduring about him. His story didn't end with the agony. No, his legacy lived on in the fire he gave to humanity, in the change he helped bring about. So, take another breath. Feel the weight of the world around you, and know that even in the darkest moments, in the face of suffering, there is always hope. Just like Prometheus, we too can rise above our struggles and make a difference, even if the cost is high. And with that thought, let's rest for a moment. Let the story settle in, deep into your bones. Prometheus gave us fire. He gave us the chance to create and change, to light up the world around us. So, when you look around today at the warmth, the light, and all that you've created in your own life, know that somewhere in the depths of time, a titan defied the gods for you to have this moment. Let's take another moment to breathe. The journey through the mythological world continues, and as we move forward, the pace stays slow and steady, just like the way these stories have been passed down over generations. Each myth, like a thread, weaves into the next, pulling us deeper into a world where gods, mortals, and fate intertwine. Can you feel the air around you? Maybe there's a soft chill in the air, or maybe it's warm where you are. Either way, we're going to relax, take it easy, and let this next story unfold. We've been talking about Prometheus, haven't we? His sacrifice, his defiance against Zeus, and the gift of fire that changed humanity forever. Now, it's time to shift our focus, to move from the flames of creation to something different. It's time to talk about Pandora. Before we dive in, though, let's check in again. How's your body feeling? Are your shoulders a little less tense now? Let's take a deep breath, in and out. Good. Now, imagine yourself in the ancient world again. The gods are still on their thrones, and everything is unfolding slowly, as though time is stretching before us. Now, let's think about the gods, the ones we've already encountered, like Zeus, the king of them all. He's powerful, but like all gods, he's also filled with desires, impulses, and sometimes a touch of malice. You see, after Prometheus defied Zeus and gave fire to humanity, the gods weren't exactly in the most benevolent of moods. Zeus, ever the ruler, decided it was time to create something, or rather, someone, to keep humans in check. And that's where Pandora comes in. She wasn't born from the earth or sky, like the Titans or the Olympian gods. No, Pandora was crafted by the gods themselves, each one contributing their own unique gift to her creation. Imagine that, a woman created by the gods, each one shaping her in their image. Beautiful, yes, but also dangerous. She was meant to be a gift to mankind, but with a twist. You see, Pandora's story is one of curiosity, of temptation, and ultimately of consequences. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's slow down. Picture this. The gods are gathered, and each one is contributing to Pandora's form. Athena gives her wisdom, Aphrodite gives her beauty, and Hermes gives her charm. She is perfect in every way, and as she steps into the world, she becomes the first woman. And yet, there's something unsettling about her, a sense that there's something beneath that beauty, something lurking just out of sight. But it wasn't just her outward appearance that made her dangerous. No, Pandora also received a jar, a gift from Zeus himself. This jar, sealed tightly, held something mysterious, something that the gods would not explain. But the gift came with a warning. Pandora was never to open the jar. Why? Well, because within it lay all the evils of the world. Pain, suffering, jealousy, sickness, death, all contained within that jar. Now, imagine you were Pandora for a moment. You've been given a beautiful gift, a mysterious one, but you're told never to open it. That's hard, isn't it? The curiosity, the pull of the unknown can be so strong. And that's what Pandora felt. The temptation was just too much. She had to know what was inside. She had to open the jar, and so Pandora did. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the lid. At first, nothing happened, but then a dark, swirling mist poured out, and with it, all the evils that the gods had trapped inside. Can you feel the weight of that moment? The moment when Pandora, with just one action, unleashed all the pain and suffering into the world. The moment when the gods' plan backfired, and the world, our world, was forever changed. But that wasn't the end of the story. As the evils of the world poured out, there was one last thing left in the jar. One thing that remained behind. Hope. Pandora quickly closed the jar, trapping hope inside. And in that moment, a strange thing happened. The world, though now filled with suffering, also held on to something precious. Hope. The one thing that, despite everything, humans would always have. It's a strange paradox, don't you think? The gods gave humanity a gift that seemed like a curse, but within that curse, there was also something beautiful. Hope, though hidden, remained. And perhaps that's the most profound lesson of all. Sometimes, even in the darkest moments, there's a glimmer of something better. Now, let's sit with that. Can you feel the weight of Pandora's choice? It's easy to look at her and think she was foolish, to judge her for opening the jar. But haven't we all felt that pull, that curiosity, that need to understand the mysteries of the world? Haven't we all opened our own jars, so to speak, knowing that there might be consequences? And yet, even in our mistakes, there's hope. There's always hope. Take another deep breath in. Let it out. The world may be filled with suffering and hardship, but as long as we hold on to hope, there's a chance for change, for redemption. In the world of the gods, Pandora might have unleashed evil, but in our world, we have the power to turn those evils into something meaningful. We have the choice to find hope, even when it seems hidden away. And with that, let's pause for a moment. Let the story settle in, just like the light from that jar, flickering in the dark. Take a breath and think about your own jar. What's inside? What are you holding on to? And what might you choose to release? The gods may have played their games, but in the end, it's us who carry the power to shape our own fates. We continue now with a tale of soaring ambition, a tale that we've all heard of but perhaps never truly felt. Icarus, the young son of Daedalus, a brilliant inventor, and the man behind the labyrinth that held the terrifying Minotaur. Daedalus was a master of creation, but he also had the burden of being trapped by his own genius. This story, like so many others, starts in a place of confinement. Not just physical confinement, but the kind of mental trap that comes when we're forced to live under the control of others. Icarus and his father, Daedalus, had been imprisoned by King Minos of Crete. But Daedalus, ever the inventor, wasn't the kind of person who would accept a prison cell for long. He'd crafted the labyrinth that had held the Minotaur, but now he was trapped in a maze of his own. So, Daedalus did what any genius would do in such a situation. He created a way out. Not by breaking down walls or sneaking through doors, but by taking to the skies. The wings Daedalus crafted for his son Icarus were no ordinary wings. They were masterpieces, constructed of feathers bound together with wax and string. Can you see them in your mind? The lightness of the feathers, the glimmer of the sun hitting the wax, and the sheer beauty of them. Daedalus created them so that they could escape the island, and together father and son would fly away from their prison. But here's the catch. Daedalus warned Icarus, as any father would, of the dangers that lay ahead. "Don't fly too high," he said, "for the sun will melt the wax and you'll fall." But then he also said, "Don't fly too low either. The sea's dampness will weigh down your wings." The balance was delicate. Too high, and the heat of the sun would destroy their flight. Too low, and the sea's humidity would drag them down. There was a sweet spot in between where flight was safe. But Icarus, like all of us at some point, was intoxicated by the thrill of freedom. His wings were powerful, and the wind felt so good against his face. For the first time in his life, he was no longer confined. He was no longer bound by anything. And the more he flew, the more the world below him shrank. The higher he went, the more the clouds parted, revealing the vast expanse of the sky, stretching endlessly above. Icarus forgot his father's warning. He flew higher and higher until the warmth of the sun began to soften the wax holding his wings together. But he was so caught up in the feeling of flight that he didn't notice the wings starting to come apart. The sun's heat melted the wax, and in a heartbeat, Icarus's wings disintegrated. He fell, plummeting into the sea below, and with his fall, he vanished from the world. The tragedy of Icarus is one that has echoed through the ages, not just because of his death, but because of his ambition, his hubris, his desire to break free from the constraints of the world. In his rise, he found freedom. In his fall, he found death. It's a lesson we all know too well, the fine line between greatness and destruction. We've all been there, haven't we? We chase something, success, freedom, love, power, and we push forward without considering the consequences. It's a seductive feeling, isn't it? The wind in our hair, the thrill of success, the taste of freedom. But sometimes, just like Icarus, we get carried away, and we lose sight of what's real. We forget the limits, and in the process, we end up falling. And yet, there's something strangely beautiful about Icarus's story. Despite the tragic end, his ambition was his defining trait. He wanted to break free, to rise above the mundane, and to touch the very essence of life. In that sense, perhaps he succeeded. He flew higher than anyone ever had before, and even though he fell, he showed us what it means to dream big, to want more. In our lives, we often find ourselves on the edge of Icarus's dilemma, reaching for the stars, but wondering if we can handle the consequences. The higher we rise, the more fragile our wings become. We try to balance between ambition and caution, between soaring to new heights and staying grounded enough to protect ourselves. It's a difficult balance to strike, and more often than not, we end up falling. But here's the thing. Even in his fall, Icarus left behind something powerful. He showed us the limits of our desires and the importance of caution. But more than that, he reminded us to aim high, to dream, even if it means taking risks. Because sometimes it's worth it to fly close to the sun, just as long as we remember where the limits are. Just as long as we remember to keep those wings intact. So, let's take a moment. Reflect on the lessons of Icarus. Are we chasing our dreams, or are we letting them slip away? Are we flying too high without realizing it, or are we too afraid to take flight at all? It's a question we all must answer for ourselves, but one that Icarus will forever remind us of. To reach for the sky, but to never forget the consequences of the journey. We're entering a new chapter now, a tale brimming with strength, struggle, and triumph. The story of Heracles, one of the most iconic heroes in Greek mythology, is one that echoes through time. It's a tale of perseverance, of impossible challenges that, at times, seem insurmountable. Yet, it's in these trials that Heracles finds not only his strength, but also his soul. But before we dive into the 12 labors, let's take a moment to check in again. How's your mind feeling after all the earlier tales? We've traveled through the creation of the world, the rise and fall of gods, and the tragic fall of Icarus. Now, we shift gears to a hero's journey. A hero who, though his strength is unmatched, faces challenges that test him in ways we can relate to. Life, after all, is full of seemingly impossible tasks. Heracles, born to the mighty Zeus and the mortal Alcmena, had a destiny carved into his very bones. But his life was far from easy. Though he was a hero from birth, his life was marked by tragedy. His stepmother, Hera, who harbored deep resentment toward him because of his father's infidelity, decided to make his life a living hell. Heracles, even as an infant, faced the wrath of Hera when she sent 2 serpents to kill him. But the infant Heracles, in an early display of strength, strangled the serpents with his bare hands. If that didn't set the stage for his legendary status, nothing would. But even after this early display of might, Heracles was far from being free of hardship. His life became a series of endless trials, all designed to prove his worth, and not just to others, but to himself. And so, it was that Heracles was tasked with 12 labors, 12 impossible tasks, each more difficult than the last. These were not simple quests to retrieve a lost artifact or fight a single monster. No, these were feats that would test every fiber of his being, each one requiring more than just strength. They demanded intelligence, perseverance, and, most of all, courage. The first labor, one of the most famous, was the slaying of the Nemean lion. This wasn't just any lion. The Nemean lion had skin so tough that no weapon could pierce it. It was a beast so fearsome that the very thought of it sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to face it. But Heracles, undeterred, didn't use a sword or a spear. Instead, he used his own strength, his bare hands, to strangle the beast. In the end, he wore its impenetrable skin as armor, a symbol of his triumph over the impossible. Now, I want you to stop for a second. Think about what it means to face something that seems invincible, something that no one else could defeat. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when we face challenges in our own lives. We think, how can I ever get through this? How can I overcome what feels impossible? Heracles, though a god-born hero, wasn't immune to these feelings. He had to rely on more than just his strength. He had to use his mind, his patience, and his resilience. And isn't that something we can all relate to? The feeling of facing something far bigger than us, and yet finding a way to push through. The second labor was just as daunting. Heracles was tasked with slaying the 9-headed Hydra. This creature, for those who don't know, had one head that could regenerate into 2 for every one that was cut off. It was a nightmare, a creature that seemed impossible to defeat. But Heracles wasn't alone. He was aided by his nephew, Iolaus, who helped him by cauterizing the stumps of the Hydra's heads, preventing them from regrowing. Together, they defeated the beast, and Heracles dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood, making them even deadlier. Now, this is where things start to get interesting. This wasn't just about brute strength. This was about strategy, thinking ahead, and having the courage to adapt when things weren't going according to plan. It's easy to think that success is just about being strong or having all the answers, but the real power comes in those moments when you have to get creative, to change your approach, and find a new way to succeed. Heracles had the physical power to slay the Hydra, but it was his ability to think and adapt that led him to victory. As we move through Heracles' trials, each one becomes more difficult, more complicated. He's tasked with cleaning the Augean stables, a job so massive and impossible that it had never been done before. He's tasked with capturing the Ceryneian hind, a creature so fast that no mortal or god could catch it. He's sent to fetch the golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by a dragon, and to retrieve the cattle of Geryon, a creature with 3 bodies. Each task, seemingly more impossible than the last, forces Heracles to dig deeper within himself. And in each of these moments, we see that Heracles isn't just physically strong. He's mentally sharp, resourceful, and determined to get the job done. What does that teach us? Maybe it's this. We're all given challenges in life, some of them huge, some of them overwhelming. But what Heracles shows us is that even in the face of seemingly impossible tasks, we don't need to face them alone. We can rely on our resources, our friends, and our ingenuity. And sometimes, the greatest strength comes from the ability to keep going, to keep pushing forward, no matter how hard things seem. With each labor, Heracles' legend grew. But let's not forget, the labors were never just about gaining fame or power. They were about redemption. You see, Heracles had been tricked into killing his wife and children in a moment of madness, a curse set upon him by Hera. These labors were his penance, his way of atoning for the terrible things he had done. And in the end, they weren't just tasks. They were a journey that allowed him to confront his demons, his mistakes, and ultimately, to find peace. The labors of Heracles weren't easy, and they weren't simple. They were a test of everything he was: his strength, his intelligence, his resilience, and his heart. And in the end, it wasn't just about completing the tasks. It was about the transformation that came through those challenges. Heracles didn't just become a hero because of what he did. He became a hero because of who he became along the way. As we look at our own lives, perhaps we can take a little inspiration from Heracles. The challenges we face might not be as grand as slaying a lion or capturing a 3-bodied monster, but they are real and they test us. And, like Heracles, we have the power to face them, to learn, to grow, and to rise above. After all, isn't that what true heroism is about? Let's continue, together, as we move forward in this journey through mythology. Each story, each hero, each god, they all show us something we can carry with us. And perhaps, like Heracles, we too can find redemption and transformation in the challenges we face. As we continue our journey, we find ourselves on the precipice of a story that speaks to the soul, one of love so deep it defies the boundaries of life and death. Orpheus, a figure whose music could charm even the gods themselves, and Eurydice, the woman he loved so passionately, share a story of loss, hope, and the ultimate price of defiance. It's a tale that isn't just about the gods or the myths, but about the very human experience of grief and longing. Let's take a moment to picture the world around us. The night is quiet, the air still. As we sit with this story, perhaps you can feel the rhythm of Orpheus's music flowing through the air, soft and haunting. Can you hear it? The gentle pluck of the lyre, each note carrying the weight of love and sorrow. It's a sound that can tame the wildest of beasts, calm the winds, and even move the hearts of gods. But this story, like all great myths, begins with a heart-wrenching loss. Orpheus was no ordinary man. He was a son of Apollo, god of music, and his gift was beyond anything mortals could comprehend. His music was so beautiful, so enchanting, that it could make rivers change course, trees bend, and wild animals gather around to listen. He was beloved by all, gods, nymphs, and men alike. And then, in the midst of all his greatness, he found Eurydice. Their love was nothing short of magical. It was the kind of love that seemed destined by the gods themselves. But as often happens in myth, fate had other plans. On the day of their wedding, as Eurydice danced through the meadows, she was bitten by a venomous snake and died. Orpheus, heartbroken and consumed by grief, could not bear the thought of living without her. His heart was shattered, and the music he played became a reflection of his sorrow. The gods themselves, moved by the depth of his mourning, allowed him a chance to reunite with her, but at a great cost. Orpheus, desperate to reclaim the love he had lost, descended into the underworld. This journey, down into the dark realms of Hades and Persephone, was not one for the faint of heart. The underworld was a place of shadows and spirits, where souls wandered aimlessly for eternity. It was a place where the living were not meant to tread. Yet, Orpheus, driven by the power of his love and his music, crossed its threshold. As he entered the realm of the dead, Orpheus began to play his lyre. The music that had once charmed the gods now reached the ears of Hades and Persephone, rulers of the underworld. His melody was so pure, so filled with grief and longing, that even the hardest hearts were softened. The spirits of the dead wept, and Hades himself was moved. He agreed to let Eurydice return to the land of the living, but with one condition. The condition was simple. Orpheus could lead Eurydice back to the surface, but he must not look back at her until they had both emerged from the underworld. It was a test of faith, a challenge of trust. The moment he looked back, the spell would be broken, and Eurydice would be lost to him forever. Can you feel the tension building? Orpheus, the man who had the power to move mountains with his music, was now bound by the simplest of conditions: faith. The power of his love, the very thing that had brought him to this point, now depended on his ability to trust the gods, to trust in the promise that Eurydice would follow him out of the darkness. Can you imagine the temptation? The pull to turn around, to see the woman he had lost, to know that she was truly there. Orpheus walked, and for what must have felt like an eternity, he resisted the urge to turn. The darkness around him was oppressive, and the silence was deafening. Every step felt like an eternity, and the weight of his grief and love pressed down on him. But as they neared the exit, the sunlight barely visible through the distant shadow of the underworld's gate, doubt began to creep into Orpheus's mind. Could she truly be there? Was this real? Had the gods tricked him, or was he being tested to the very core of his being? And then, in a moment of utter despair, he turned. His gaze met hers just for a fleeting second, and the spell was broken. Eurydice, reaching for him, was pulled back into the darkness, gone, forever. In that single moment of doubt, Orpheus lost everything. The love he had fought so hard to regain slipped from his grasp, and he was left with nothing but the haunting sound of his own music. The grief that had once filled his heart was now all-consuming, and for the rest of his life, he swore never to love another. He wandered the earth, playing his music for anyone who would listen, but the joy of life was gone. The gods had taken his love, and with it, his spirit. Orpheus's tragic fate is one that resonates with us all, even today. How many of us have experienced the feeling of losing something, or someone, so dear, and the deep longing that comes with it? How many times do we question fate, or wonder if there's something we could have done differently? Orpheus's tale is not just about the gods, or the underworld, or even the power of music. It's about the fragility of love and the weight of the choices we make in times of desperation. And yet, there's a lesson to be found here. Orpheus was granted a second chance, an opportunity to bring his love back from the dead. But in his moment of weakness, he looked back. He doubted, and in that instant, his world crumbled. It's a story that asks us, do we trust in the promises made to us? Do we believe in what we can't see, even when everything inside us is telling us to look back, to check, to make sure that everything will be all right? Take a moment to think about it. How many times in your life have you faced a situation where everything depended on your ability to trust, to move forward without looking back? Orpheus's mistake wasn't just turning around. It was that moment when his trust faltered. His story serves as a reminder that sometimes the greatest test we face is in our faith. The faith to trust that what we seek will be ours, even when we can't see it clearly. But perhaps the most beautiful part of Orpheus's story is that, despite everything, his music never stopped. Even in his sorrow, even in his loss, Orpheus's music continued to echo through the world. It was his legacy. And so, maybe in the end, even in our deepest pain, the music doesn't stop. It plays on. The heart continues to love. The soul continues to hope, even after everything is lost. Orpheus's tragedy is not just a story of loss, but of the undying power of love and the music that binds us all. As we continue on, let's remember that even in the darkest of times, there's still a song to be sung. There's still beauty to be found, even in the shadows. And that, like Orpheus, we must keep playing, keep believing, even when we can't see what lies ahead. We're diving into a story now that's been told and retold through millennia, a story that echoes through every corner of history and myth, the Trojan War. But this isn't just any battle. It's a war fueled by pride, rage, and the wrath of one man, Achilles. This tale isn't just about armies clashing or cities falling. It's about the cost of pride and the devastation that comes when even the mightiest of heroes are driven by their own unchecked emotions. Let's take a moment to slow down and let this world settle in. Imagine the great walls of Troy rising up before you, the sound of the crashing waves against the shore, the cries of warriors preparing for battle. This was a war like no other, where the gods themselves took sides, where mortal men were driven to acts of violence and courage, where love and revenge intertwined in a deadly dance. Before we get into the heart of Achilles' rage, let's pause and set the stage. The war began not with a clash of swords, but with a stolen love, a simple act that set everything into motion. Paris, a prince of Troy, took Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. It was a betrayal that ignited a firestorm across the ancient world, drawing in every king, every hero, and every god with promises of glory, revenge, and power. The Greeks sailed to Troy, and what followed was a 10-year siege, a war of attrition with no end in sight. At the heart of this war was Achilles, the greatest warrior the world had ever known. He was unmatched in strength, speed, and skill. He was a demigod, born of the sea nymph Thetis and the mortal Peleus, and his very birth marked him for greatness. But with greatness came a price, a flaw that would shape his destiny. Achilles had one weakness, one small vulnerability, and that would be the downfall of so much. But let's focus on his rage, the driving force behind so much of what happened. The war was long, and Achilles fought fiercely, earning victories for the Greeks. But as time went on, tensions grew. Achilles, proud and unwilling to bend, found himself in conflict with Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces. The quarrel began over a prize of war, a woman, Briseis, who had been given to Achilles as a reward for his bravery. Agamemnon, feeling slighted by Achilles' victory, took Briseis for himself, an act that was both personal and humiliating for Achilles. Can you feel the sting of that? The deep cut to the pride of a warrior like Achilles, the insult that would drive a man like him to the brink of madness. In that moment, Achilles withdrew from the war. He refused to fight for the Greeks anymore, and without him, their armies faltered. The tide of the war began to turn, and the Trojans, once on the defensive, began to push forward. Now, Achilles' anger wasn't just about the loss of Briseis. It was deeper than that. It was about respect, honor, and his place in the world. For a man like Achilles, his reputation, his strength were everything. Without them, he was nothing. He believed the gods had gifted him with power, and yet here, in this moment, his own leader, Agamemnon, had stripped him of his dignity. Achilles' wrath was a reflection of his own vulnerability, his need to be seen, to be honored, and that, in turn, would lead to tragedy. The Greeks struggled without Achilles. Their losses mounted, and the Trojans began to gain the upper hand. The battle reached a tipping point, and the Greek forces realized they could not win without their greatest warrior. But Achilles, still nursing his rage, refused to return to the battlefield. It wasn't until his close friend Patroclus, unable to stand by and watch the Greeks suffer, donned Achilles' armor and led the Myrmidons into battle in his place. Patroclus fought valiantly, but the Trojans, believing it to be Achilles himself, targeted him relentlessly. In the end, Patroclus was struck down by Hector, the greatest of the Trojan warriors. When Achilles learned of Patroclus' death, the world around him seemed to shatter. His grief, his rage consumed him. In that moment, his humanity, his connection to those around him, became intertwined with his vengeance. Achilles' response was swift and brutal. He returned to the battlefield, clad in his armor, and went on a rampage. His rage was so fierce, so all-consuming, that it seemed nothing could stand in his way. He killed Hector, the noble Trojan prince, and desecrated his body, dragging it behind his chariot. It was a moment of brutal triumph, but also one of deep sorrow. Achilles' vengeance, though satisfying in the moment, would ultimately leave him hollow, because no amount of bloodshed could ever bring back the ones he had lost. And that's where the story of Achilles becomes a tragic reflection of human nature. His wrath, which had once been a tool of power, became his undoing. His inability to forgive, his relentless drive for honor, led him down a path where no victory was ever enough. Achilles didn't just lose his friend Patroclus, he lost his own peace of mind, his own sense of self. He was so focused on revenge that he couldn't see the emptiness it would bring. Achilles' story teaches us about the dangers of unchecked anger, of letting our pride and our desires control us. It's easy to see the heroic figure in him, the warrior who stood tall in the face of impossible odds. But it's also important to remember the cost of that heroism, the personal price he paid, and the lives that were destroyed along the way. And even in his final moments, as he faced death at the hands of Paris, with an arrow aimed at his vulnerable heel, Achilles' story is one of human frailty. No matter how great the hero, there is always a flaw, always a weakness. His death wasn't just the end of a warrior. It was the final lesson in the danger of pride, of vengeance, and of being too consumed by the need to be remembered. So, as we sit here, let's think about Achilles and the choices he made. How many times have we let our own anger, our own pride, push us to act in ways we later regret? How many of us have focused so much on a single goal, revenge, honor, recognition, that we've lost sight of the bigger picture? Achilles, in his quest for glory, paid the ultimate price. And in his story, we see the reflection of our own battles, our own inner struggles with pride, anger, and the consequences of our actions. Take a moment to think about that. What does Achilles' story mean for you? What part of his journey resonates with your own? What can we learn from his rage, his grief, and his eventual redemption? In the end, perhaps the greatest lesson of Achilles' story is that no victory is worth the cost of losing ourselves along the way. We move on now to a journey unlike any other, one that spans the vast, unpredictable seas, where gods intervene, and human will is tested to its limits. The story of Odysseus, the hero of Homer's Odyssey, is a tale of endurance, cleverness, and the search for home. A search that stretches over 10 long years and countless trials. But it's also a story of transformation, of how a man, shaped by his hardships, returns to his roots changed, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. We've spoken of Achilles, a man of immense strength and rage. Now we turn to Odysseus, a man of equal valor but with a different kind of power. One born not of brute force, but of intellect, cunning, and the ability to navigate the turbulent world around him. It's a journey, as all great journeys are, marked by a constant back and forth between triumph and failure, hope and despair. But before we go deeper into Odysseus's trials, let's take a moment to settle into the atmosphere of this tale. Picture yourself on the rocky shores of Ithaca, a quiet, wind-swept island. The sea stretches out endlessly before you, the air salty and fresh, and you feel the pull of both the comfort of home and the daunting unknown. This is where Odysseus's journey begins, and it's here, in the heart of the storm, that we find the first thread of his tale. Odysseus, like many heroes, did not start as the man we remember. He was a king of Ithaca, a man at the height of his power. Yet his true journey began when the call to fight in the Trojan War sounded. His cunning, as much as his strength, made him a key figure in the Greek forces. It was Odysseus's idea to build the great wooden horse that would bring about the fall of Troy. His role in the war was pivotal, but the victory came at a cost that would haunt him long after the flames of Troy had died out. After the war ended, Odysseus set sail for home, eager to reunite with his wife, Penelope, and his son, Telemachus. But fate, it seems, had other plans. The gods, always watching, had their own tests in store for him. What should have been a straightforward journey home turned into an odyssey of trials and tribulations. It was a journey that would see him confront monsters, gods, and his own weaknesses. One that would stretch his endurance, his intelligence, and his very soul. The first of these trials came when Odysseus and his men landed on the island of the Cyclopes, giants with one massive eye in the center of their foreheads. Here, Odysseus faced the terrifying Polyphemus, a cyclops who trapped them in his cave and began devouring them one by one. But Odysseus, ever the strategist, didn't panic. He devised a clever plan to escape. He told Polyphemus that his name was Nobody. So, when he and his men blinded the Cyclops, Polyphemus could only shout that nobody was hurting him. The other Cyclopes, hearing his cries, thought nothing of it and left him alone, allowing Odysseus and his men to escape. It was in moments like this, when faced with certain death, that Odysseus's wit became his greatest asset. He was a man of action, yes, but it was his mind that often led him to victory. And yet, even in these triumphs, there was always a price. As Odysseus and his men sailed away from the island, Polyphemus cursed them, asking his father, Poseidon, to make their journey home as long and painful as possible. And so, the gods began to weave their web of trials around Odysseus, ensuring that his journey would be anything but easy. As Odysseus journeyed on, he encountered the enchanting sorceress Circe, who turned his men into pigs. Yet, with his wit and charm, Odysseus was able to resist her magic and make her a helpful ally. He then traveled to the Underworld, where he met the ghost of the prophet Tiresias, who foretold the hardships ahead and gave him crucial advice on how to make it home. Each encounter, whether with gods, monsters, or mortals, tested Odysseus in different ways, forcing him to confront his desires, his fears, and his very mortality. But perhaps the most famous of his trials came with the sirens, beautiful, dangerous creatures whose songs could lure men to their deaths. As Odysseus and his men sailed past the sirens, he ordered his men to block their ears with wax, but he himself, ever curious, tied himself to the mast of the ship so that he could hear their songs without succumbing to their lure. It was another act of cunning, but also a moment of profound personal struggle. He wanted to hear their voices, to experience the temptation, but he knew that he couldn't let it control him. It was a moment of self-awareness, where Odysseus understood the danger within himself and took measures to protect his crew from it. These trials and tribulations, which spanned 10 long years, changed Odysseus. He became more than just a hero. He became a symbol of human resilience. The gods, who had played such a significant role in his downfall, also played a part in his redemption. Athena, in particular, guided him and helped him return home. But even in the final moments of his journey, when he finally reached Ithaca, he found that his trials were far from over. He returned to a kingdom in disarray, with suitors vying for Penelope's hand. The war to reclaim his home was fought not on the battlefield, but in his own palace. In the end, Odysseus reclaimed his throne and reunited with his wife, but the journey had transformed him. The man who left Ithaca was not the same man who returned. His journey through the gods' trials had been one of self-discovery, of learning to balance his intellect with his humanity. He was a man who had, time and again, relied on his wits to overcome impossible odds, but also a man who had faced the most fundamental human challenges: the desire to return home, the struggle to protect those we love, and the quest for redemption. The story of Odysseus is not just a story of overcoming monsters and trials. It's a story of the journey we all face in life. We are all on our own odyssey, navigating through challenges that test us in ways we never imagined. And, like Odysseus, we must rely on more than just strength. We must use our minds, our resilience, and our ability to adapt to the ever-changing world around us. Odysseus's journey teaches us that home is not just a place, it's a state of mind. And it's the journey, with all its hardships and rewards, that shapes who we become. As we continue on, let's think about our own journeys. What are the trials we face? How do we navigate the monsters in our lives? And, like Odysseus, how do we return to ourselves after all the battles, the struggles, and the lessons learned along the way? This story takes us underground again, into the shadows, into the realm of death itself. But unlike Orpheus's fleeting journey, this tale centers on Persephone, one of the most enduring figures of Greek mythology. Her story isn't just about loss or abduction. It's about cycles, transformation, and the delicate balance between life and death, light and darkness. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. She was radiant, the embodiment of spring itself. Fields blossomed at her presence, flowers opened as she walked, and the earth seemed to breathe easier when she laughed. She was youth and growth and vitality all wrapped into one. But, as with all things in myth, beauty often drew danger, and Persephone's fate was sealed the moment Hades, ruler of the underworld, set his eyes upon her. Hades, unlike his thunderous brother Zeus or tempestuous Poseidon, was quiet, brooding, and solitary. He ruled over the dead, not out of choice, but because that was his lot after the division of the cosmos. Yet, beneath his dark crown there was longing, a desire for companionship, for a queen to sit beside him on his lonely throne. And when he saw Persephone, he decided she would be his. One day, while Persephone wandered through a meadow gathering flowers, the earth itself opened beneath her. Out of the chasm rode Hades in his black chariot, pulled by dark horses. Without a word, he swept her into his arms and descended into the depths. The meadow closed again, leaving nothing behind but the scattered flowers she had dropped. Demeter, her mother, searched the earth for her daughter. She wandered day and night, refusing to eat, refusing to rest, her grief so heavy that the crops withered, the fields lay barren, and famine spread across the world of men. Can you imagine that kind of grief? A mother so heartbroken that even the earth reflected her sorrow. Every stalk of grain that failed to sprout, every barren field, was a mirror of Demeter's pain. Finally, Demeter discovered the truth. Persephone was in the underworld, taken as Hades' bride. Furious, she demanded her daughter's return. Zeus, ever the mediator, sent Hermes, swift messenger of the gods, to retrieve her. Hades, though reluctant, agreed, but not before he offered Persephone a pomegranate. She ate a few seeds, and that single act sealed her fate. The rules of the underworld were strict. Anyone who consumed food in that realm was bound to it. Persephone, having eaten the pomegranate seeds, could not leave entirely. And so, a compromise was struck. For part of the year, Persephone would dwell with her mother, and the earth would flourish with crops, flowers, and abundance. For the other part, she would return to Hades, and the world would wither into winter. This is how the Greeks explained the cycle of the seasons, the ebb and flow of life, death, and rebirth. Persephone's descent and return marked the rhythm of the earth, the balance of abundance and scarcity, warmth and cold, joy and sorrow. But beyond its role as an explanation of nature's cycles, Persephone's story speaks to something deeper. It's about change, about the way we are all drawn into shadows at some point in our lives. Just as Persephone could not remain only the maiden of flowers, untouched by grief, neither can we remain unshaped by hardship. She became queen of two worlds, goddess of spring above and queen of the dead below. Her journey was one of transformation, of growing into her power through both joy and suffering. Think about that. How many times have you been pulled into your own underworld, into darkness, loss, or hardship? And yet, like Persephone, each descent changes us, gives us strength, and when we return to the light, we're never the same as before. We carry both worlds within us, the joy and the grief, the spring and the winter. Persephone's story isn't just about abduction or fate. It's about the balance we all live with. Life isn't only abundance, nor is it only sorrow. It's both, intertwined, like seeds planted in the soil. And when we think about her eating the pomegranate seeds, it's almost like she accepted her fate. Not as a victim, but as someone who would rule both realms. She embraced the duality of her existence and became something greater than she had been before. Her tale still lingers with us today, in every cycle of the seasons, and every time we fall into hardship and rise again. Persephone reminds us that even in the darkest winters, spring will return. And even when life feels barren, there's always the promise of growth ahead. So, as we move forward in our myths, remember Persephone, the maiden of spring, the queen of the dead. She is both, always both, and maybe so are we. Now we come to one of the great adventure stories of Greek myth, a quest across seas, through danger, and into lands filled with gods, kings, and monsters. This is the story of Jason and his band of heroes, the Argonauts, in their search for the Golden Fleece. If the tale of Odysseus was about the long struggle to return home, then Jason's story is about the yearning to claim a destiny, to prove himself worthy of kingship. It's less about survival and more about ambition, what a man will risk in order to reclaim what he believes is rightfully his. Jason was the rightful heir to the throne of Iolcus, but his uncle Peleus had stolen the crown. As fate often plays its part in myth, Jason returned as a young man to claim his inheritance. Peleus, unwilling to give up power so easily, set Jason a challenge: bring back the Golden Fleece. A task so impossible, so far-fetched, that surely Jason would never return alive. The Golden Fleece, a symbol of kingship and divine favor, was kept in a faraway land, Colchis, guarded by a dragon that never slept. Yet Jason accepted. He would not go alone, though. Heroes gathered to his cause, each one as legendary as the next. Heracles, Orpheus, Atalanta, Castor, and Pollux, the greatest names of Greek myth. Together they became the Argonauts, named for their ship, the Argo. Imagine that ship for a moment, cutting across the waves. Its sails filled with wind, its wooden frame creaking against the weight of the sea. The men aboard it weren't just warriors, they were legends, each with their own story, their own ambitions. It must have felt like sailing with the stars themselves. But of course, no quest in myth is straightforward. The Argonauts faced trial after trial, each one testing not just their strength, but their unity. They encountered the Harpies, those dreadful winged creatures that plagued the blind prophet Phineus by stealing his food. Jason and his crew freed Phineus from his torment, and in return, he guided them on their way. They sailed past the clashing rocks, massive cliffs that smashed together without warning, destroying any ship that dared pass through. Only with Athena's help and Jason's steady leadership did the Argo make it through. When they finally reached Colchis, the true challenge awaited. The king of Colchis, Aeetes, was not about to hand over the fleece. Instead, he set Jason yet another trial: to yoke fire-breathing bulls and plow a field with them, then sow it with dragon's teeth, from which armed warriors would spring. Jason, alone, could not have succeeded. But fate intervened in the form of Medea, Aeetes' daughter. Medea was no ordinary princess. She was a sorceress, gifted with powerful magic. And in one of those moments where love and destiny collide, she fell for Jason. Perhaps it was the will of the gods, or perhaps it was the way Jason carried himself, but Medea decided to help him. She gave him a potion to protect him from the bull's fiery breath, and advice on how to defeat the earthborn warriors that would rise from the dragon's teeth. Jason did as she instructed, turning the warriors against each other until none remained. Even then, the fleece was still guarded by a sleepless dragon. Once again, Medea's magic proved crucial. She lulled the beast to sleep, and Jason seized the prize. The golden fleece was his, and with it, he returned to claim his throne. But the story doesn't end in triumph. For Jason, like many heroes, found that success brought new burdens. Medea had betrayed her family for him, and their love would later curdle into tragedy of its own. Still, in this moment, Jason's quest shows us the nature of ambition and the power of unity. He couldn't have done it alone. He needed his Argonauts, his companions, and the loyalty of Medea to succeed. His story is not one of solitary triumph, but of how greatness often comes with the help and the sacrifices of others. And the fleece itself? A symbol, shimmering in golden light, representing not just kingship, but the cost of pursuing power. It teaches us that quests worth pursuing are never simple, never clean, and always come at a price. This myth is one of the most unusual and vivid of all Greek stories, the birth of Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, springing not from a womb, but fully armed from the head of Zeus himself. It's a story that feels at once absurd and profound, and, like so many Greek myths, it holds layers of meaning beneath its surface. Athena was destined to be different from the start. Her mother was Metis, the goddess of wisdom and cunning, a figure who could match Zeus in intellect and foresight. But there was a prophecy. If Metis bore a child, that child would be more powerful than its father, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus, and Cronus had overthrown Uranus. The cycle of children rising against parents was etched deep into the bones of mythology, and Zeus feared it. So he did what Zeus often did when threatened. He acted ruthlessly. Instead of letting the prophecy unfold, he swallowed Metis whole. Strange as it sounds, Zeus believed that by consuming her, he could prevent the prophecy, keeping her wisdom for himself while eliminating the threat. For a while, it seemed to work, but the gods are never so easily satisfied. After swallowing Metis, Zeus began to suffer. A great pain, like thunder itself, split his head. It grew worse and worse until even the king of gods could not endure it. Imagine Zeus, ruler of the skies, master of thunderbolts, groaning in agony, clutching his head as though the sky itself were caving in. None of the gods could help him, until Hephaestus, the god of fire and smithing, stepped forward. With his hammer, Hephaestus struck Zeus's head, splitting it open. And from that wound, in a burst of light and power, Athena emerged. Fully grown, clad in gleaming armor, spear in hand, shield upon her arm. She let out a war cry so fierce it shook Olympus itself. And just like that, wisdom and war were born together, not from the womb, but from the mind. Think about that symbolism. Athena, goddess of wisdom, strategy, and just warfare, wasn't born in the usual way. She wasn't shaped by maternal nurture, but by intellect, thought, and divine power. She represents the mind's ability to create, to protect, and to fight when necessary. Her very birth tells us something profound. True power isn't brute force. It's intelligence, foresight, and wisdom. Athena stood apart from the other gods. While Ares, her half-brother, embodied the chaos of war, the bloodshed, the frenzy, the destruction, Athena represented the strategy, the discipline, the kind of war that was guided by purpose. She wasn't only the goddess of war, she was also patroness of crafts, reason, and cities, particularly Athens, which took her name. Her birth also broke the cycle. Zeus, by consuming Metis, did not prevent the prophecy. He fulfilled it in another way. Athena did not overthrow him, but she became his ally, his most trusted daughter. She balanced his impulsiveness with reason, his thunder with calm clarity. Perhaps in the end, that's what the myth is telling us. That wisdom isn't about replacing power, but guiding it, shaping it, ensuring it doesn't consume itself. There's something strangely comforting in this story. Out of pain came clarity. Out of a splitting headache came the goddess who embodied wisdom. Haven't we all had moments like that, where suffering or struggle gave birth to something new inside us? Maybe not in armor and glory, but in resilience, in understanding, in growth. So, when you think of Athena, remember her strange and violent birth. Born from pain, born from thought, she carries with her the reminder that wisdom often comes in the hardest of moments, and that it arrives fully armed, ready to defend, ready to create, ready to guide. This tale is gentler than the thunder and blood of wars and gods, but in many ways, it's even more human. It's a story of two young lovers, bound by circumstance, separated by walls, and united by a tragedy that feels painfully familiar. Pyramus and Thisbe, names that may not hold the same weight as Achilles or Odysseus, but whose story lingers in the heart with its quiet sorrow. They lived in Babylon, neighbors whose families were bitterly opposed. Between their houses stood a wall, not thick enough to keep out voices, but firm enough to keep out touch. Through a crack in that wall, Pyramus and Thisbe whispered their love. Can you imagine that? Two people so close, just an arm's length away, yet unable to meet. The wall, both literal and symbolic, stood between them as a barrier their families had built, but their hearts found a way through the smallest gap. Night after night, they leaned close, speaking softly through the crack. Their words carried longing, tenderness, and the dream of freedom. They promised each other that one day they would defy the wall, defy their families, and meet beneath the open sky. And so, one evening, under the cover of darkness, they made a plan. They would meet outside the city, near a mulberry tree by a quiet spring. Thisbe arrived first. The night was calm, the stars above cold and watchful. But as she waited, a lioness, fresh from a kill, came to drink at the spring. Terrified, Thisbe fled, her veil slipping from her as she ran. The lioness, uninterested in her, mauled the veil with bloodied jaws before disappearing into the night. When Pyramus arrived, he found only the shredded, bloodied veil. His heart broke. He believed Thisbe had been slain by the beast, and in his grief, he blamed himself. He drew his sword, and beneath the mulberry tree ended his life. His blood soaked the ground, staining the white berries of the mulberry tree a deep, dark red. Then Thisbe returned. She found him dying, his blood staining the earth, the sword still warm. She cried out, rushed to him, and as she held him in her arms, she saw the truth, the misunderstanding, the cruel twist of fate. And when Pyramus drew his last breath, Thisbe, overcome with grief, took the same sword and followed him into death. The gods, moved by their devotion, honored their love. They left the mulberry tree as a monument, its berries forever red, stained by the blood of two lovers who sought only to be together. It's a story that whispers of innocence and tragedy, a reminder of how fragile love can be in the face of the world's cruelties. Pyramus and Thisbe had no armies, no quests, no divine interventions. Their only battle was against the walls built by their families and the cruelty of fate. And in the end, their love, though short-lived, became eternal, etched into the world itself in the color of the mulberries. It's quiet, isn't it? No thunderbolts, no divine wars, just two voices through a crack in the wall. And yet it feels more real than any god's quarrel. Perhaps that's why this story lingers. It's not about power or glory, but about the simplest of human desires, to love and to be loved freely. This story is quieter than battles and quests, but in many ways it's sharper, like a mirror that doesn't just reflect, but pierces. Narcissus, a young man of striking beauty, is remembered not for triumphs or tragedies of war, but for the way he was undone by his own reflection. His tale lingers because it touches on something deeply human, the danger of seeing too much of ourselves and not enough of others. Narcissus was born with beauty so rare that poets claimed even the gods paused to admire him. Every detail was flawless. His hair like golden threads catching the sunlight, his eyes bright as the sky reflected in a lake. Wherever he went, people turned their heads. Men, women, nymphs, all were drawn to him as though the world itself leaned toward his light. But Narcissus's heart was unmoved. Suitors came and went, love was offered, devotion was begged for, but he dismissed it all. It wasn't arrogance, perhaps, so much as indifference. He simply could not give what others sought so desperately from him. Among those who longed for him was Echo, the mountain nymph cursed to only repeat the last words spoken to her. Once she had been lively, able to sing and laugh and talk freely. But after offending Hera, her punishment left her with only fragments of language, echoes that bounced from others' voices. When Echo saw Narcissus, her heart burned with love. She followed him through the forest, her silence aching, until finally she tried to reveal herself. He called out, "Who's there?" And she answered, "There." He searched, "Come to me." And she repeated, "To me." Finally, she rushed to embrace him. But Narcissus pulled back, cold, rejecting her love. Shamed and heartbroken, Echo withered away until all that remained was her voice, still repeating the words of others, fading among cliffs and valleys. The gods, seeing Narcissus's cruelty, decided he should learn what it meant to love and not be loved in return. One day, as he wandered by a clear pool, he knelt to drink. There, in the water's surface, he saw a face. Perfect, radiant, tender. He was transfixed. He reached out, but the reflection rippled and vanished. He bent closer, spoke softly, and the lips seemed to answer. He fell in love with the image, not realizing it was his own. Day after day, Narcissus lingered by the pool, unable to look away. His body grew thin, his strength drained, but still he gazed, entranced. He reached for the reflection, only to find water, always water. In time, he wasted away entirely, his body dissolving into the earth. Where he fell, a flower bloomed, the narcissus, pale and delicate, bending always toward the water. It's a story that asks a question we all must face. What happens when love turns inward, when we are so consumed with ourselves that we forget to see those around us? Narcissus didn't mean to be cruel, but his inability to return affection, to look beyond himself, destroyed not only Echo but also himself. And yet, there's also tenderness in the tale. Who among us hasn't stared into our own reflection, whether in water, a mirror, or in the minds of others, and wondered if what we see is lovable? Narcissus's downfall was obsession, but behind it lies a universal longing, the desire to be seen, to be cherished, even if only by ourselves. The myth lingers because it's both warning and mirror. Too much self-obsession leads to ruin, yes, but the story also reminds us how fragile love is when it is unreturned. Echo's fading voice, Narcissus's wilting body, Both become symbols of longing that turns to emptiness. Next time you pass a still pond or catch your reflection in glass, think of Narcissus. Not as a figure of arrogance, but as a reminder that love, real love, cannot grow when it is trapped inside the self. It must reach outward, echo into the world, and be returned, or else it fades away, leaving nothing but silence and flowers. Now we step into one of the most haunting and unforgettable myths in all of Greek tragedy, the story of Oedipus. It is not a tale of gods hurling thunderbolts or heroes slaying beasts. Instead, it is about fate, inescapable, unrelenting, and devastating. It's a story that asks us whether we truly control our lives or whether we're simply walking paths laid out long before we take our first breath. Oedipus's story begins not with him, but with a prophecy. His parents, King Laius and Queen Jocasta of Thebes, received a grim oracle. Their son would one day kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, they decided to cast their newborn out, abandoning him to die. But fate, as myths remind us again and again, cannot be escaped so easily. The infant was found and raised by the king and queen of Corinth, who named him Oedipus. He grew up unaware of his true parentage. As a young man, Oedipus too heard whispers of fate, that he was destined to kill his father and marry his mother. Terrified, he fled Corinth to avoid harming the parents he thought were his own. He believed that by running, he could outsmart the gods, that he could carve his own destiny. But, as we know, in trying to avoid fate, he walked straight into it. On the road to Thebes, Oedipus encountered Laius, his true father. Neither recognized the other. A quarrel broke out, as pride often leads men to violence, and Oedipus struck Laius down. He had fulfilled the first half of the prophecy without even knowing it. When he arrived in Thebes, the city was suffering under the terror of the Sphinx, a creature who devoured anyone who could not solve her riddle. Oedipus, clever and determined, answered the riddle correctly. Man who crawls on 4 legs in the morning, walks on 2 at noon, and limps on 3 in the evening. The Sphinx, defeated, destroyed herself, and the people of Thebes hailed Oedipus as a savior. They offered him the throne, and with it, the hand of the widowed queen, Jocasta. He accepted, unknowingly completing the prophecy's second half. Years passed. Oedipus ruled wisely, the people prospered, and he seemed destined for greatness. But the gods are patient, and truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. A plague struck Thebes, and in seeking its cause, Oedipus learned the horrifying truth. He was not the son of Corinth's rulers. He was Laius and Jocasta's son. He had killed his father. He had married his mother. He had not escaped fate at all. The revelation shattered him. Jocasta, in her despair, took her own life. Oedipus, horrified by what he had done, blinded himself. A once great king was reduced to a broken wanderer, led by his daughter Antigone, living proof that no man, however clever or powerful, can escape the designs of the gods. The story of Oedipus is deeply unsettling, isn't it? Unlike tales of heroes who triumph over monsters or outwit the divine, Oedipus gives us no comfort. His downfall was not from arrogance alone, though pride played a part. It was from the inevitability of fate. He teaches us that sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite our choices, we cannot escape the currents pulling us through life. And yet, perhaps there is something strangely cathartic in Oedipus's tragedy. He did not choose his fate, but he did choose how to face it. By blinding himself, he took responsibility, as unbearable as it was. His suffering was immense, but his endurance gave meaning to the horror of his story. Maybe that's why this myth lingers so deeply. It reminds us of the tension we all live with, between choice and destiny, between the life we try to shape and the forces beyond our control. From Oedipus's fall, the story naturally flows into the lives of his children. Among them stands Antigone, a figure as tragic and unyielding as her father, yet remembered for her courage rather than her downfall. Her tale is one of defiance, of choosing what she believed was right over what the world demanded of her. After Oedipus's exile and death, Thebes was left in turmoil. His sons, Eteocles and Polynices, fought over the throne. Their conflict escalated into a brutal civil war, a struggle so fierce that the two brothers eventually killed each other on the battlefield, each struck down by the other's hand. With their deaths, the throne of Thebes passed to their uncle, Creon. Creon declared that Eteocles, who had defended the city, would be honored with a hero's burial. Polynices, who had brought war against Thebes, would be left unburied, his body rotting under the sun, food for scavenging animals. To the Greeks, this was no small punishment. Burial rites were sacred. Without them, a soul was denied peace in the afterlife. To deny burial was to condemn someone eternally. And this is where Antigone steps into history. She could not accept Creon's decree. To her, family came before politics, and the gods' laws came before the laws of men. She believed Polynices, for all his flaws, deserved the dignity of burial. So, under the cover of night, Antigone crept out and gave her brother the rights he had been denied. Creon, furious when he learned of this, ordered her arrested. Antigone did not deny it. She stood firm, proud even, before him. Their confrontation has echoed through centuries of storytelling. Creon, representing the rigid authority of the state, and Antigone, representing moral duty, compassion, and the divine law. Creon argued that order depended on obedience. Antigone argued that justice depended on mercy. Her punishment was brutal. Creon sentenced her to be entombed alive in a cave, sealed away to die. Yet even in this, Antigone did not falter. She accepted her fate with dignity, believing her choice was righteous even if it meant death. Inside the cave, she took her own life, sparing herself the slow agony of starvation. When Creon discovered her body, it was too late. His son Haman, who had loved Antigone, killed himself in grief. Then, Creon's wife Eurydice also took her life, unable to bear the weight of tragedy. Creon, once so certain of his power and justice, was left alone, broken, his family gone. Antigone's story is tragic, but it carries a quiet, steady strength. She reminds us that sometimes doing what is right means standing against authority, even when the cost is unbearable. She was no warrior, no goddess, but her defiance has echoed louder than many heroes' triumphs. She represents the voice that refuses to be silenced, even when the world closes in. Her tale asks us hard questions. What do we owe to the dead? To our families? To our conscience? And when the laws of men clash with the deeper laws of compassion and justice, which do we choose to follow? Antigone chose her answer, and though it destroyed her, it also immortalized her. This is one of those myths that has an image burned into our minds. A hero holding up the severed head of Medusa, the snake-haired Gorgon whose very gaze could turn men to stone. But, like all these stories, it's not just about the battle or the trophy. It's about fear, courage, and the cleverness needed to face horrors that seem impossible. Perseus's story begins, as many do, with a prophecy. His grandfather, King Acrisius of Argos, was told that his grandson would one day kill him. To prevent this, Acrisius locked his daughter, Danae, away in a bronze chamber. But Zeus, as the myths love to remind us, could not be stopped by locks or walls. He came to Danae in the form of a golden shower, and Perseus was born. Acrisius, terrified of the prophecy, placed mother and child in a chest and cast them into the sea. They survived, washing ashore on the island of Seriphos, where Perseus grew up. But soon, fate began to weave its threads again. The king of Seriphos, Polydectes, desired Danae, but Perseus stood in his way. So the king devised a plan. He demanded a wedding gift, something no one could possibly bring: the head of Medusa. Medusa was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, but unlike her immortal siblings, she was mortal. Her hair was made of living snakes, and her face so terrible that anyone who looked at her turned to stone. It was a death sentence disguised as a quest. But Perseus accepted. Here's where the story turns. Perseus was not left to face this horror alone. The gods stepped in. Athena gave him a polished bronze shield gleaming like a mirror. Hermes gave him a curved sword, sharp enough to pierce anything. Hades lent him his helmet of invisibility, and the nymphs provided winged sandals to carry him through the air, and a special pouch to hold Medusa's head. It was a reminder that even heroes need help, that triumph often comes from the gifts and guidance of others. When Perseus finally found Medusa, she lay asleep among her sisters in a cavern filled with statues, the frozen remains of those who had looked upon her. Imagine that sight. Warriors caught mid-battle, faces twisted in fear, their bodies forever locked in stone. Perseus could not look at her directly, so he used Athena's shield, catching her reflection in its bronze surface. Step by step, he approached, the snakes hissing softly in the darkness. With one swift motion, he struck. The blade cut clean, and Medusa's head was severed. From her neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior, strange offspring born from her blood. Perseus placed the head in the pouch, careful never to look at it, and fled before her sisters could awaken. The head of Medusa was more than a trophy. It was a weapon, one Perseus carried with him through the rest of his journeys. He used it to turn enemies to stone, to protect his mother, and eventually gave it to Athena, who set it on her shield, the Aegis, as a symbol of protection and fear. But Medusa's story lingers in another way, too. She wasn't always a monster. In some versions, she was once a beautiful maiden, cursed by Athena after being violated in her temple. Her transformation into a Gorgon was less a punishment of her crime than of her victimhood, a cruel reminder of how myths often reflect human injustice. Perseus's triumph is celebrated, but Medusa's sorrow is felt beneath the surface. So when we think of Perseus holding her head high, we see both victory and tragedy. The slaying of Medusa is a triumph of courage and cunning, yes, but it is also a reminder of how thin the line is between monster and victim, between heroism and cruelty. If Perseus's story was about cunning and divine gifts, Theseus's tale is about courage, sacrifice, and a confrontation with a monster that is as symbolic as it is terrifying, the Minotaur. His myth carries with it the weight of civic duty, the need to break cycles of cruelty, and the cleverness needed to navigate both monsters and men. The story begins in Athens, a city bound by shame. Years earlier, King Minos of Crete had demanded a terrible tribute from them. Every 9 years, Athens was to send 7 young men and 7 young women across the sea, to be thrown into the labyrinth and devoured by the Minotaur. This creature was no ordinary beast. Born of Minos' wife and a divine bull, the Minotaur was half man, half bull, a grotesque symbol of lust, pride, and punishment. Hidden deep within the twisting labyrinth, built by the craftsman Daedalus, the Minotaur was a secret that could never be faced directly, until Theseus. Theseus, son of Aegeus, king of Athens, grew up with the knowledge of this burden on his people. When the time came for the tribute, he volunteered to go, not as a victim, but as a hero who would end the cycle. His father begged him not to, but Theseus's resolve was firm. He promised to change the fate of Athens or die trying. When Theseus arrived in Crete, fate intervened in the form of Ariadne, daughter of King Minos. She saw him and fell in love, but more than that, she recognized his courage. She could not bear the thought of him entering the labyrinth without hope of return. So she gave him a gift, a simple ball of thread. It was not a sword, not armor, but something humble and clever. By tying one end at the entrance and unraveling it as he went, Theseus would be able to retrace his steps and escape once his task was done. Inside the labyrinth, darkness pressed in on every side. The walls turned and twisted, designed to disorient, to trap, to break the mind before the body. Yet with each step, Theseus pressed forward, following the faint sound of the beast's breath, the scrape of hooves against stone. And then, at the heart of the maze, he saw it, the Minotaur. Its massive body, the glint of horns, the animal hunger in its eyes. The battle was brutal. The Minotaur charged, its strength overwhelming, but Theseus was quick, determined. He grappled with the beast, his body straining against its power. Finally, with courage and precision, he struck it down. The monster that had haunted Athens for generations lay dead, its curse broken. Using Ariadne's thread, Theseus found his way back, leading the other youths to safety. He had not only slain a monster, he had freed his city from fear, from a cycle of sacrifice that had drained it for years. Yet, like so many Greek heroes, Theseus's story is tinged with sorrow. He promised Ariadne that he would take her with him, but along the journey home, he abandoned her on the island of Naxos. Why he did so varies in the tellings. Some say it was the will of the gods. Others say his resolve wavered. But Ariadne, who had saved him, was left behind. And worse still, Theseus had promised his father Aegeus that, if he succeeded, he would return with white sails. In his haste, he forgot, and the ship approached Athens with black sails still flying. Seeing them, Aegeus believed his son was dead, and in despair, he threw himself into the sea that now bears his name, the Aegean. Theseus returned victorious, but at the cost of his father's life and Ariadne's love. His triumph was real, but incomplete, as so many triumphs are. The labyrinth itself lingers in our minds as a symbol, the twisting, confusing paths of life, the monsters hidden in its center, and the thread we each carry. Our wit, our resolve, our ability to find our way back when all seems lost. Theseus teaches us that courage and cleverness can slay monsters, but choices always have consequences. This story begins not with kings or warriors, but with something quieter. The sound of a loom, threads weaving together into patterns so beautiful they seemed almost alive. Arachne was her name, a mortal woman from Lydia, famed throughout Greece for her skill in weaving. Her tapestries were so fine, so intricate, that people whispered she must have been taught by the gods themselves. But Arachne was proud, and pride, as these myths remind us again and again, is always dangerous. When others praised her work and claimed she owed her gift to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and crafts, Arachne denied it. She insisted that her skill was her own, greater than even the goddesses. She did not just claim equality, she challenged Athena directly. It's easy to understand her pride, isn't it? Imagine being so good at something that even the gods were said to envy you. But hubris, that dangerous blend of arrogance and defiance, was always punished in Greek myth. Athena, hearing Arachne's boast, decided to confront her. Disguised as an old woman, she approached Arachne and warned her to show humility. But Arachne, unshaken, repeated her challenge. If Athena truly thought herself superior, let her prove it. The goddess shed her disguise, and the contest began. Each woman set up her loom. The air filled with the rhythm of weaving, threads snapping into place with divine speed. Athena worked with discipline and grandeur, crafting a tapestry that depicted the gods in all their glory, their power, and their triumphs. It was a warning as much as a work of art, a reminder of divine authority. But Arachne's tapestry told a different story. Her work was flawless, the images so real they seemed to move. And what did she weave? Not the gods' glory, but their flaws. She depicted Zeus disguising himself to seduce mortal women, Poseidon's pride, Apollo's betrayals, every scandal, every hypocrisy. It was bold, it was dangerous, and it was breathtaking. When Athena saw it, she could not fault the craft. Arachne's skill was perfect, perhaps even beyond her own. But the subject, mocking the gods, was an insult too great. In her fury, Athena tore Arachne's tapestry to shreds and struck her down. Shamed, humiliated, and broken by the loss of her work, Arachne hanged herself. Yet even then, Athena softened, moved by pity. She touched Arachne and transformed her, not into nothingness, but into a spider, cursed to weave forever. Her threads would never again form tapestries admired by men, but they would continue endlessly, fragile and strong, spun in silence. Arachne's story is a warning against pride, yes, but it also lingers as a kind of tribute. Her skill was so extraordinary that it could not be erased. Even in punishment, her weaving endures. Every web spun in the corner of a room, delicate and geometric, is a shadow of her defiance, her talent, and her fate. It makes you wonder, was her punishment truly a curse or a strange kind of immortality? Athena silenced her voice, but her art lived on, long after kingdoms fell and myths were forgotten. Maybe that's the truest form of victory, a creation that cannot be destroyed no matter how fragile it seems. If Theseus showed us courage, and Arachne showed us defiance, Agamemnon and Clytemnestra show us something darker: betrayal, vengeance, and the terrible costs of pride. Their story is heavy with blood, tangled with the curse of the house of Atreus, a family line haunted by violence that passed from one generation to the next. Agamemnon was the king of Mycenae, brother of Menelaus, and one of the leaders of the Greek forces at Troy. When Helen was taken by Paris, it was Agamemnon who rallied the armies of Greece, setting the stage for the decade-long Trojan War. But his role as a commander came at a price long before the war even began. The Greek fleet, assembled at Aulis and ready to sail, was struck by still winds. The ships could not move. The gods were angry, specifically Artemis, who demanded a terrible sacrifice. To appease her and let the fleet sail, Agamemnon was told he must offer his daughter, Iphigenia. Imagine that moment. A king, a father, forced to choose between his duty to his people and his love for his child. In the end, Agamemnon chose duty. Iphigenia was sacrificed, and the winds filled the sails. But at home, Clytemnestra, his wife, never forgave him. Her grief and rage smoldered in silence for 10 long years while Agamemnon fought at Troy. She ruled in his absence, outwardly calm, but inside she was planning. For every battle he won abroad, she was preparing her own war at home. When Troy finally fell and Agamemnon returned, he did not come alone. He brought with him a prize of war. Cassandra, the Trojan princess, cursed with the gift of prophecy that no one would ever believe. To Clytemnestra, this was the final insult. Her husband had killed their daughter, abandoned her for a decade, and now returned flaunting another woman. The welcome she prepared was not one of love. She greeted him warmly, weaving words of affection, but her heart carried only vengeance. Some say she laid out crimson tapestries for him to walk upon, a gesture so lavish that it seemed almost mocking. And once inside the palace, when Agamemnon let down his guard, Clytemnestra struck. With an axe, she killed both him and Cassandra, spilling their blood as retribution for Iphigenia. She did not hide her deed. She stood proudly over his body, declaring that justice had been served, that the cycle of violence begun with his sacrifice of their daughter had found its balance. But the story did not end there. Orestes, their son, would later avenge his father by killing Clytemnestra, continuing the curse of the house of Atreus. One death led to another, a cycle without end, each act of vengeance birthing another, like waves crashing against the shore. What makes this myth so powerful is not just the violence, but the questions it forces us to face. Was Agamemnon right to sacrifice his daughter for the good of Greece? Was Clytemnestra justified in avenging her child? Or was everyone a prisoner of fate, bound by curses and choices that could never lead to peace? The tragedy of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra is a reminder that pride, ambition, and vengeance often walk hand in hand. And in their house, those forces destroyed everything: love, loyalty, and even family. Our journey through these 20 myths ends with one of the most memorable cautionary tales in all of Greek lore: the story of King Midas, whose wish for boundless wealth became his undoing. It is a story that shines brightly on the surface but hides deep shadows beneath, a reminder of how desire, unchecked, can turn into madness. Midas was a king of Phrygia, remembered not for wars or wisdom, but for his greed. He loved wealth above all things, and his heart was never satisfied. The more he had, the more he wanted. Gold glittered in his eyes like the sun itself, and he dreamed of a world where everything he touched would shine with that brilliance. One day, fortune, or perhaps misfortune, gave him the chance. According to the tale, Midas showed kindness to Silenus, a satyr and companion of Dionysus, who had wandered drunkenly into his gardens. When Dionysus came to retrieve him, he offered Midas a reward for his hospitality. The king asked for only one thing: that everything he touched would turn to gold. Dionysus, reluctant but bound by his word, granted the wish. At first, Midas rejoiced. He touched a stone, and it glittered. He touched a branch, and it gleamed. His palace shimmered. His robes shone, and his hands seemed to carry the sun itself. To him, it was a dream fulfilled, a sign that he had been chosen for greatness. But soon, joy turned to horror. When he reached for food, it turned to solid gold before he could eat it. Water became golden streams, undrinkable. And worst of all, when his daughter came to embrace him, she too turned to lifeless metal in his arms. The very gift he had begged for became a curse heavier than any crown. Desperate, Midas begged Dionysus to take back the gift. The god, moved by his suffering, told him to wash in the river Pactolus. As Midas bathed, the power left him, flowing into the waters. From then on, the sands of the Pactolus were flecked with gold, but Midas himself was freed. Freed, but not unchanged. His story does not end with redemption, though. In later tales, his greed is replaced by folly. Competing in a music contest between Apollo and Pan, Midas favored Pan's rustic pipes over Apollo's lyre. Offended, Apollo gave him the ears of a donkey, a punishment for his poor judgment. Once again, Midas's vanity became a source of shame, and though he tried to hide his donkey ears, the secret spread, whispered by reeds that grew from the earth. The myths of Midas remind us that wealth and desire can easily slip into madness. His golden touch seems at first like the ultimate blessing, but it reveals the truth. What we crave most can destroy us when it blinds us to what truly matters: food, water, love, family. And so, Midas's tale closes our journey much as it began, with the gods granting gifts that come with heavy costs, with mortals caught between desire and consequence. In his shining hands, we see the reflection of our own wants, our own endless hunger for more. But we also see the lesson that gold, for all its glitter, cannot nourish, cannot comfort, cannot love. Only the simple, fragile things, bread, water, touch, can do that. And sometimes, the greatest wealth lies not in what we grasp, but in what we let go.